questions to come across and a lot of practical experience to be shared upon. Mr. Jill, thanks for joining in, who brings in a diverse set of experience, all related to telecom industry and associated elements. Mr. Srinivas, who again brings in an experience which is extremely wide-ranging, starting from 1G, going all the way till now till 5G, but looking forward to 6G as well. Thank you for being over here. And Mr. Hardeep Saini, who's been right at the front of making sure how telecom services can be used upon in a more commercial way so that all of us as consumers can get the benefit of the technology which is being produced upon. So this is, as I said, in many ways it's continuing from where we left the last session. It was quite an interesting session as I was observing, but let me set up some context. As a country, over the last couple of years, we've gone, or we have taken a quantum leap when it comes on from a connectivity perspective. The world, as well as the country, recognize the power of technology and the network which is required to bring in connectivities across, and we saw that happening during pandemic. I'll not get into details, but the resilience of the network really got tested during that period, and the strength of the network really came to rescue. As we move from that era to a leaping era where we will be having a hyper-connected ecosystem, there is a need again to transform our technology as well as network capabilities. It's driving big transformation programs, and I will not steal the thunder when I have got such luminaries along with me to talk upon on what's the promise of 5G that comes across. The panel is going to talk upon on all those areas. It will also bring across how this next decade is going to be the technology-led decade, and what are the perspectives which we should be looking forward from there. So with that background, let's get going on the discussion. Maybe let me get going with Shyam yourself. Shyam, I talked upon, I gave that context saying we're possibly moving from an era of being always connected to an era of hyper-connected, which is where multiple devices will be connected. Devices possibly which were never expected or anticipated to be connected will be connected upon as well. And that definitely brings a lot more stress, but a lot more opportunity. My question really is, what's our readiness at this point of time, and what are some of the challenges that we anticipate as we get into this era?
Thanks, Atul. And I think I want to start by saying that we are still using the word connected as the anchor adjective for 5G when we move to 4G. And one of the first things which I wanted to highlight is one paradigm shift that has happened between 4G and 5G is 5G is not only hyper connected, it is actually beyond connected. And when I mean beyond connected, there are two more important contributors of digital in the overall digital value chain, and I call them as holy trinity of communication. Connectivity, of course, is the backbone, and then on top of connectivity there is compute, and then there is storage. And so far, historically, 4G and below, connectivity has been a separate vehicle, and compute and storage have been an independent, island-based models which were actually riding on connectivity. What is happening with 5G, the fundamental change which is happening with 5G is the connectivity, compute and storage are actually embedded together. So it's not only hyper connect, it is hyper compute and hyper storage, right up to the edge, densified as close to the customer as possible. In fact, the capability of device also to now compute and storage and negotiate that compute and storage in a client server model. We showcased Cloud PC the other day, wherein you just have a screen and the whole connectivity, compute and storage is coming out of the cloud which connects to you. So for us, as the telecom industry, I think we need to be very, very clear that when we are talking about 5G, it is definitely beyond connectivity. It is about compute and it is about storage. Now, from a readiness and challenge perspective, which Atul alluded to, I think one of the good things which has happened in last decade in India is the all-pervasiveness of 4G, which means that from a physical infrastructure perspective, the densification of tower infrastructure perspective, the connectivity of tower from a high broadband, high-speed IP MPLS riding on fiber perspective, I think we are good to go. At Jio, we claim that urban towers are more than 85 to 90% fiberized. Now, this is one of the biggest constraints which operators world over are facing, saying that if you get if you're serving Gbps speeds in the access network, does your backhaul network, is your backhaul network ready to align with that? And I think that's from a readiness perspective there. The challenges I would allude to is speed of execution is definitely a challenge. We are a big country. We are talking about connecting more than 1.3, 1.4 billion people. We are talking about 320 million square kilometers of area. We are talking about deep, dense urban and very rural kind of demographies. How do we actually execute this? Spectrum has been thankfully now made available after the auctions. And one last word on spectrum before I pause on this question is, again, till 4G, we have been a laggard as far as spectrum holdings have been concerned. If you look at global holdings of any operator versus what we've been holding, we've won by 5x, won by 4x. I mean, look, if you look at Far East, you look at West, you look at Europe, wherever. But for the first time, I think we are getting closer. I would still not call it adequate because our footfall per square kilometer is still kind of mind-blowing from an order of magnitude different than what not only a London or a New York are, but even what a Shanghai and a Beijing or a Jakarta is. Densest cities in the world, we beat them black and blue from our density, population density, which means that we obviously need that kind of spectrum to service the level of expectation the customer want. But thankfully with these kind of spectrum holdings, now that we have all in 5G, I think we're getting closer from an adequate perspective. So from a spectrum starved industry, we are getting into a near adequate spectrum kind of industry. We are getting backhaul ready. We are getting edge compute ready, which will be one of the largest vehicles that is going to drive this whole 5G bandwagon. So, long story short, I think if we look at this culmination of hypercompute, hyperstorage, and hyperconnectivity together with the right set of infrastructure, I think we are poised very well to unleash this whole hyper digital, if I may use the word, Atul, for the next decade. Will pause here.
Thank you, thank you. As I said, someone who is really dealing with it at this moment, so thank you. Clearly it was coming from that live experience and much appreciated, Shyam, on those thoughts. Taking it forward, Jill, if I can bring you in, and possibly you can bring in a much global perspective as well, how you're getting to see at this point of time the various adoptions which are happening around 5G globally, and some of the opportunities and challenges which are emerging that you get to see at this moment.
Okay, thank you. And first of all, thank you very much to have us on the panel with those honoring speakers. So, with my accent, you can probably understand that I'm coming from Europe, and more especially from France. But the key things that I want to bring here is India has made, in the past 5 years, on the 4G, moving from 9% to 68, 70% of the population, and congratulations on that, a leapfrog compared to the other regions that are making the people so excited for the 5G. Today, if you are looking at the world, China is definitely ahead of everybody in terms of 5G deployment. They have massively invested. The operators, that was led by the operators, they decided to massively deploy the 5G. Korea was also the first one to deploy, and if you are looking at Korea, the increase in terms of consumptions of the bandwidth and the use cases in terms of cloud gaming and live streaming of videos has been exponential. Now Europe is still a little bit on the back seat, started, more to come. North America started, and I think that before this, on the previous panel, people were commenting that the operators in North America were trying to do a kind of, I have a better bandwidth than you, so you should pay more for me than the other one. And I think they are losing track. We are losing track outside of India of the use cases. I was impressed when the Honorable Prime Minister made the 5G opening to see the use cases. Here, everything is about use cases. What does it bring to the end user? And so I think that India will definitely lead the 5G deployment. And I'm expecting that in the next 2 years, we will see India ahead of all the other regions from a use case perspective, because this is where you are starting. You are not starting only for the connectivity, you are starting by what does the connectivity bring to the end user, and what should the end user be able to do with this connectivity? Cloud gaming, entertainment, but business, how can the remote villages can start new businesses is all what's making here very exciting. And we strongly believe that as an AMD, as a technology platforms, we will be accelerating the India 5G deployment.
Thank you so much, Jill, for sharing those perspectives, bringing a global viewpoint, and how you see India being positioned rightfully at this point of time to take the journey ahead. Very, very interesting thoughts. If I move forward to Mr. Mr. Srinivas, you've seen this journey over the last 3 decades of how, or 3 decades plus, and how telecom has transformed, not just as a technology, but also as a customer experience, which is completely transformed. How do you see this era? How do you see this decade, which is coming across at this point of time?
Can you hear me? Okay, good. So let me start with my experience in wireless cellular technology. So when I started my career as a engineer, as a fresher, new grad, my first project was 1G, which was analog cellular at the time, called AMP standard. So my first project was to build a hardware cellular access processor along with the team. So in those days, the base station, which serves the wireless, used to occupy this whole stage. And each device is so big that you needed a backpack to carry it. And the battery used to run for 15 minutes, 10 minutes. So that's how we started our cellular journey at that time, right? So then on, I've been engineer since then on and stayed with engineering, and we have seen many transitions, many disruptions. So from AMP's analog technology, we moved to digital. We went to 2G, which European standards called it GSM. And then there was equivalent technology on the North American side, other side of the pond, which is CDMA. So there were 2 standards going at each other on the 2G side, and then 2.5G side. Then we eventually came together in the 3G, in the UMTS, where we have, from standards perspective, both voice and data coming together, but small of data. And then eventually into the 4G LTE, everything has become data now. So there were a lot of technology shifts, right, from analog to digital. And then from there, from different technology like ATM technologies, TDD technologies to TDM technologies to IP, all IP, 4G is all IP technology. And then also transition from voice to data. And we all know how the voice to data transition happened. I mean, everybody, I still remember our vice president came in and said, voice is still the king. And then before we knew it, it was all data. And so if you don't take care of the technology transitions and the disruptions, you get disrupted. So we have seen it with not only the technology vendors, but also with the operators as well. So in India, for the operators who have adopted CDMA technology, they disappeared, and they all converged into one technology at the end of the day. So moving forward between 4G and 5G, what I would say is, I know there were a lot of discussion in the earlier panelists and speakers. See, the 2 key things that are the difference between 4G and 5G are 2 things. One is from 3GPP standards perspective, it's called EMBB, which is enhanced mobile broadband, and then ULL, which is ultra low latency. So how do you achieve those 2, right? How do we make it happen? Is you have to enable applications. Otherwise, like the previous panelist said, you'll get extra data, more broader, and you get more bandwidth. But to enable, you need network architecture. So the network architecture is very important. So you need to have disaggregated, distributed architecture where you can actually be flexible in your deployment, because many applications would require low latency. Okay, you can provide ULL in 5G, But when you actually measure in any 5G network, I have verified in Verizon, AT&T, end-to-end latency is still in 40 milliseconds, 35 milliseconds, because I mean, the end-to-end also requires going through the backhaul, mid-haul, all those latencies. So those cannot be solved overnight. So that's when these edge technologies come into picture. You need to have some of these applications hosted on the edge. So at Rakuten Symphony, I mean, we pushed hard on the Open RAN, Open and Virtual RAN technologies. So previously, just a month back, we demonstrated, I'm sure some of your kids have been playing Minecraft games, and when you play over the web, you see a lot of latency. I mean, you'll be moving and trying to build something, it takes a longer time. So we were able to demonstrate Minecraft with less than 5 millisecond latency with the distributed and disaggregated architecture.
Sure.
So that is where I see moving forward. We need to be, network architecture is very important to get the maximum out of 5G. You need to be able to be flexible, and you need to be able to disaggregate and enable any kind of deployment for the operators.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think the key over there, as you walked us through the memory, and I was sharing this yesterday in another panel, saying that every generation, the duration which is required to move from one generation to another generation has only gone down, but the power has only increased. So thank you for walking us through that memory lane, and how 5G brings in a lot of promise, and how architecture is going to be so important. I think that brings in a great segue to bring in Hardeep over here. Hardeep, clearly 5G as a technology promises a lot more. We just heard Mr. Srinivas talked upon an edge, ORAN, virtual RAN being talked upon, network slicing being talked quite extensively, saying how some of these technology and the shifts which it's coming along with 5G will bring in a lot more flexibility in the way how some of the objectives can be attained. I believe you deal with this, helping all the operators in bringing this vision into reality. Your thoughts around the same?
Sure, I think I'll probably start with something Shyam said earlier, that in terms of the fundamental assets, which is spectrum in our case, we now have access to a combination of low band, mid band and high band spectrum. So that serves as a good baseline to build good networks, right? In terms of what technology brings in, you have multiple facets of technology, and depending on what you're trying to achieve, you could have some very, very specific applications. The baseline technology, for example, will give you much higher capacities, because we are building in techniques like massive MIMO, multi-user MIMO. So what that is able to do is to help you reduce your cost per bit and bring a lot of bandwidth or throughput to the end user. Then the other aspect is improving or making the user experience more consistent. One of the challenges you will have as you transition is, in the earlier generations, the edge users used to have very poor performance in some sense. So if you are at the edge, the bandwidth is limited, but there are a lot of users competing. You used to have that challenge. Now with the beamforming techniques, you are able to improve that edge user as well. So from a coverage perspective, end user experience perspective, that helps. And then on top, the technology provides a lot of hooks. Some of that are available now, some of that come in due course, right? So you have ultra reliable low latency. You talk. There is also massive machine type communication. So I think the thing which probably excites me the most is we have on air interface or on wireless technologies, we have not provided any guarantees in terms of service or bandwidth. But you can provide some QoS, but it's not really guaranteed. But for some specific use cases, it is very, very important to have a certain target as far as packet drops, as far as latency goes. So that's one feature which as a technologist at a personal level, I'm very excited about, right? And then as you go forward, you have standards will continue to evolve. So So what we will see is probably in the first wave, you will see a lot of EMBB applications. But as you start converging, as you take the smartphone users along, you will have all these new segments which will open up, which could be your private networks, enterprises, some specific use cases. So then the technology becomes available to a lot of other industries which we did not have in our fold as it grows. And if you look at basic standards participation as well, so you will not just see technology companies, operators coming in, but a lot of other industry people now have started represent. There is 5G Automotive Association, right? And there are other verticals. A lot of Industry 4.0 players now show up in the standardization for 5G and 5G Advanced, 6G going forward. So that tells you in terms of the applications, everybody sees it as an opportunity. The question is going to be what timeline, and that will purely be dependent on one, both the network and the device availability, and second thing is ecosystem readiness in general to have the right application, the right mix of use cases available to them. Things like AR, VR, I think everybody talks about metaverse as well. Some of those things will require some of these advanced features, and I think they will come soon enough. I think so. We are right at the cusp in some sense.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts, Hardeep. Very clearly, you brought in a perspective of seeing how technology is helping in bringing the cost per bit down. And yet it's attracting the ecosystem to come together, because that's the potential and opportunity which is coming along with this technology. So thank you for sharing those inputs. Shyam, if I was to come back to you, and in the initial opening question, you did highlight upon how there is a big quantum shift that's happening. It's a fallacy to think it's only network. It's about the compute, it's about the storage which is coming. But the point which just came up as Hardeep was talking, the opportunity is now much wider and much broader. How do you see, as a technology provider, you are creating this for the future? And what's the industry at large should be looking forward to? Because I did talk upon initially saying many things which in past were very difficult to get connected upon. There is a big promise over here. And every industry is potentially going to get benefited out of what we are looking as a future over here. But as a technology provider, how do you see that unfolding across for the country?
I think an excellent question, and very relevant one as well. So if you look at the whole demand side economics of communication for the next 10 years, and how is that panning out, we can very clearly see that this is getting broken up into three very orthogonal vectors, and each one of these three orthogonal vectors need to be treated separately, need to be dealt with separately. The first vector is more or less what we have been seeing so far in our communication journey, and it is more of the same of what exists today. We're calling it enhanced mobile broadband, but effectively it is consumer mobile consumption, which is actually now going to get 50, 60, 100, 200% upside with the new resource available. And again, I think if you look at the broadband, mobile broadband consumption over the years, right now here in India, I think we contribute to at least 16 to 17% of global cellular data. That is huge from today's perspective. But that's just 4G. If you now move this whole 4G bandwagon to 5G and unleash the new spectrum which we spoken, all the latent demand which these people, all our netizens, if I may use the word, are using, is going to catapult to a totally next level. And even the behavioral changes which this is driving. If you look at digital natives, the students today, even infants today, and then younger executives, smartphone is now a very integral part of the human anatomy now. I mean, most of us will now have withdrawal symptoms if the phone is actually moved away from more than a meter's reach. I think if I can't touch it, I'm feeling a withdrawal symptom. That's the biggest fallacy. So if this goes up, and if this gets into a 2x, 3x per capita consumption, we are already talking about a shift in consumption of data going forward. So that's vector one on consumer, more of the same. Vector 2 is around machines. Vector 2 is around things. And that is getting to a crazy scale now. Anything that can be connected is going to get connected in this decade. And when I say anything, it's anything or anyone you're talking about. We have cows in our stall which highlight that how is cattle productivity getting driven using Internet of Things. How is machine-to-machine communication, onboard devices for tracking, for optimization, for performance management, the whole manufacturing thing, the whole education, how this is going to. So this vector again, and this is again from a technology and telecom perspective, it's an easy task from the functional definition perspective, because most of us know what needs to be delivered. I think you will need now bite-sized connectivity with bite-sized devices, but into millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions, if not billions, going forward. And that is going to hit us in the ecosystem going forward. Vector number 3, and that is the most complicated and the most promising vector, if I may use the word, is the Industry 4.0. And this is where I think a deep coupled collaboration between the industry verticals and telecom people is going to kind of be the fundamental platform on which this is going to play over next few years. We are talking about domain experts from manufacturing, we are talking about domain experts from agriculture, domain experts from commerce, education, healthcare. All of these guys will now need to reimagine their world with this whole digital platform. You are giving them compute on the click, you are giving them connectivity on the click, you are giving them storage on the click. There is an underlay cloud for them to play upon. Distances will finish, the readiness of edge data centers will make them super independent, will make them super proficient from a time and motion study, from a productivity per capita perspective, from a productivity per node perspective. And if you actually look at this, this is going to be a big force multiplier, if I may use the word, in this whole Industry 4.0. It's not about just a good glamorous digital version of what they were doing. This good glamorous digital version of what they were doing is actually going to put them into a totally different league. But this will be a heavy lifting. There will be a heavy lifting required with us as telecom industry and with all the adjacent industry people coming together, collaborating, understanding the design, because here it will be a bespoke solution. Unlike Vector 1 and Vector 2, where you can actually define a solution in a cookie cutter model and replicate it, here there will be multiple bespoke scenarios which are going to play out. And if you mix all of these 3 vectors, what you're going to see is your depth of penetration in your consumer business, be it mobile, handheld or home, has increased manifold. Your depth of penetration, on the other hand, in connecting things, devices, cars, washing machines, cows, cattle, whatever you say is going to increase. And then the way the business operates on the industry side, the way a manufacturing cycle runs will be, and I think it will be very, kind of looks a bit of science fiction right now, but it will be very interesting to see if you fast forward into, let's say, 2028 or 2030, the same manufacturing assembly line of an industry. How will that change with all of this deep digitization happen, with all the effort and the inputs which these domain experts need to play in and make us understand on how to convert them. But this is what makes 5G promise much more ubiquitous, if I may carry the technical word, much more promising going forward. Atul.
Thank you, Shyam, again, for bringing us to understand the 3 vectors and how those 3 vectors are going to come together. And that's the power of 5G, to bring across 3 very diverse, maybe today already in existence, but in a very diverse ways, how technology is going to bring them together. And as you said, it becoming ubiquitous eventually. That's the way forward from here. I think I'll come back on some related points to you, Shyam, but maybe continue with this conversation if we were to move to Jill. Jill, every technology, we've been talking a lot more on the pros of the technology, but every technology definitely also brings another side to it. Anything that you would like to share upon based on your experience, where you get to see what could be some of the measures which we possibly are not really thinking through at this moment, but may come back and as a wider society may impact us as we move forward?
I will use the 3 vectors that you mentioned, because at the end, all those 3 vectors will generate data. You are talking about millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of connected devices. But what are we doing with the data? What will you be doing, the operators, with those data, or the business? And I think that today this is probably the challenge that we have in front of us is what are we doing with this humongous data that will be generated by the sensors, by the connected cars, the video surveillance, by the washing machine and all agricultural. What are we doing with those data and how do we monetize those data? Because at the end, we are a technology platform provider. We need to monetize our devices and our platforms. The ecosystem software vendor need to monetize their software. The telco need to monetize their infrastructure. So at the end, we are all looking at for monetizing. And I think that the real value that the 5G is bringing as an industry, beyond the end user boundaries, will be the data monetization. Monetization in terms of productivity, increasing the productivity in the industry 4.0, changing the way the cloud gaming entertainment are seen by the end user with the immersive experience. I think that people will be ready to enjoy some of those use cases and to pay more for that or to have registration for that. So that's really the monetization and the usage of those data that for me are today the to be seen or to be think about and how to really monetize those data and how to use those data. Let me take a last example on the 5G, on the pure 5G today. One of the buzzwords that we are starting to hear is the RIC, Radio Intelligent Controller. What is the RIC? This is the way that suddenly you will have a brain that will be able to adapt your 5G radios and your 5G networks to mobility, cars or end users that will be really mobile into the infrastructure. The RIC today will receive humongous of data, but when you are saying humongous, it's terabytes of data coming from the radios with all the parameters that the industry 3GPP has planned. But how do we plan to use that in order to have a more efficient usage of the power, of the spectrum? And so we have those data available at every stage of the 5G, from the end user data to the technology or network data that will have to be processed. And this is where the AI ML will be critical, but still those apps or those automation will have to be fully operated and fully capable to use this humongous of data for something. Monetization for the telco, automation for the industry, automation or better user experience for the consumer. So I think that that's the challenge which is in front of the industry that we're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing again those inputs, Jill. I think it's an opportunity as well as a challenge, and it's the two sides, which one should be looking upon. I think you presented your thoughts very clearly in terms of the challenge which we have because of the growth of the data which is going to come through. How do you monetize it? How do you use the power of that data being generated for fine-tuning your AIs or MLs, as you were calling out? So it's a great thought out over there. Globally, there are regulations also emerging which are also playing a big role around how do you use this data, and there is always an element of a privacy which comes in, which needs to be factored appropriately. But thanks for bringing those thoughts, Jill. Moving forward to Srinivas, we talked upon on whole lot of innovation which is possible, and that will result into a lot more enhancement of user experience. Can you just double click on those areas, saying what is the potential innovation which is going to help enhance the user experience?
Okay. So first I'll start with something that will help the operators that we need to deploy in a better way. So starting from previous discussion where Randeep from Airtel has mentioned, his biggest challenge was automation, because first we need to be able to deploy the cost per gigabit. Not only that, the deployment, ease of deployment for the operators have to be well thought out. So that's where I think the number one enhancement or innovation that will come from 5G is also automation. So first is deployment of network, monitoring of the network, all the observability of the network. So all these need to be automated first. And so again, at the risk of using my company name all the time at Rocket and Symphony, I mean, our first belief was automation. So we automated the deployment of sites. So it's every time we deployed about 50,000 sites in Japan, and each site on an average of 4 minutes to bring it up. As soon as you power on the radio, the whole site would come up by itself. So there was, this is mainly because we were using cloud native technologies for both RAN and core network and everywhere. So that would be the first step. So easier to bring in automation network. So the innovation that you're talking about, I think the first step is to get into cloud native technologies for your network. That way, what cloud technologies bring in, you can automatically use. You don't need to build your own. There are a lot of innovation that is happening in the cloud area. You can use as it is. So that is, from user experience perspective as well, it is, the automation is going to help out quite a bit from, you can use it in the IoT, Internet of Things, narrowband IoT, all these areas you can do quite a bit of automation in the network and improve the user automation for the end user as well. So that's where I would see a lot of this in 5G, you can use technology, innovations. In terms of, that's where I go back to every time I say network architecture, network architecture. So for example, sorry, one last thing. In Japan, when we, in RMI, when we deployed, it was the same RAN software and in different deployment models. We didn't have to put new software in. It's the same disaggregated, distributed architecture that we were able to put it in a macro, a small cell, and a remote, rural, dense urban deployment. It's the same software. We didn't have to make any changes to that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Again, as we've been talking through the panel, I think the previous panel also highlighted opportunity for automation is phenomenal, and virtualization really helps in bringing that consistency and leverage which can be brought upon quite effectively. That's what Srinivas you were referring upon. I think let me bring in again yourself from a perspective of talking of the innovation which is happening, Hardeep, at this point of time. There's a constant view which is emerging that 5G, while it provides the innovation, but it also provides flexibility. You can do a lot of things on the run, which many times in the previous network technologies used to become a bit of a constraint. Your thoughts around the same?
Sure. In terms of the RAN side, I think there is a lot of, I think, traction on the disaggregation of the RAN, so which will mean that you can now start looking at potential solutions where you can mix and match different vendors. We expect that to bring in additional information, additional innovation in that area. And in terms of the players, I think in general, it's always better to have multiple players in the market so that you are able to get the best solution as an end user or as an operator. You want to have options available in terms of various implementation, pick and choose what works. 2 or 3 things we expect to happen. As we go along the Open RAN path, we will see more and more disaggregation over a period of time. One of the baseline requirements for disaggregation will be good backhaul networks and front haul networks, right? So as that falls in place, that kind of serves as a baseline for a one to do disaggregation. And second thing is you saw a couple of days back when Prime Minister said that we have to do more and more in the country. So this allows a lot of smaller players to come in and at least start in private network domain, for example, enterprise domain, So that also kind of helps improve some specific use cases which do not require a big box solution as well. So those would be a couple of additional areas, and then I think once the solution matures, you will see it does provide you multiple kind of levels in terms of how do you want to configure it. One of the things 5G brings in, you have combination of bands, right? You have low band, which will be sub 1 gigahertz, you have mid band, which is 3.5, and you have millimeter wave. So, and each of these bands have slightly different characteristics. Low band, you are doing, for example, passive antennas. Mid bands, you can do massive MIMO, so that requires more computation. When you go to high bands or millimeter wave, you have almost a gigahertz of bandwidth. So those requirements are very different, and what the Open RAN solutions could also do is to provide you flexibility in terms of which segment of these you are trying to address, how you are trying to build how many number of carriers you need, what capacity do you need, and you can have multiple TR configurations, how many antennas you want to have in your system as well, right? So as an operator, you have a choice, and if somebody is building technology, you have multiple potential solutions to pick and choose from and partner. And similarly, you are able to leverage what is available commercially in terms of servers and work with commercial grade servers to just kind of deploy RAN solutions as well. And then I think some of these solutions also give you flexibility where you are able to customize, for example, your layer 1 software and tweak it to your requirements. So in those terms, it does provide you a very wide range of options and a lot of flexibility.
Wonderful, wonderful. It just gives a very detailed view in terms of the options which are available and how you can leverage upon, as was highlighted by Hardeep around ORAN and the capabilities which it brings across, as well as the options and how the usage could come across. Thank you, Hardeep, for talking through that. Jill, do you want to add upon a point there?
If I can add a few comments, and I agree with 100% of what has been said. You were talking about the flexibility. I think that the 5G and the 3GPP are providing two key additional flexibility, especially for the operators, and we are seeing that in different countries. One is the network slicing, meaning that you can share your network with different application or use cases. Imagine that you have an operator which has a large networks with the right bandwidth and all the right spectrum which is deployed, but they want to be able to separate the traffic coming from the healthcare applications from the government application or from the education. They will be, with the network slicing, being able to isolate and to provide the right SLA, so the right KPI, to each of those applications using the same network. And this required an automation end-to-end. So that's perfect on that. The second one that we are also seeing happening in Europe is the operator sharing. Meaning that the cost and CapEx, we are talking CapEx here, when you have to deploy the networks, you need to deploy radios, base stations. And 3GPP has introduced, with, by the way, facilitated by the Open RAN, the multi-operator radio, meaning that especially on large countries or in areas where it's difficult to lay fiber or to have a fixed wireless access, is that operators has the capability to share the radio between several operators and still get their end user coming to their DU and CU and to their billing system, but being able to share the CapEx, the initial CapEx, with the same radio. And I think that those type of flexibility are quite important both for network slicing and multi-operator, especially on areas where it's difficult to go and to invest to have all the operators investing at the same time.
No, great point. Thank you. Thank you so much for making that. Before I come for the last comment to Shyam, to see how practical some of these things is, I want to bring in Srinivas for him to make a point. Srinivas, if you make a point, and then I'll bring Shyam.
No, I want to echo Hardeep's and Mr. Giles, all the comments, right? Say, obviously to take advantage of 5G moving forward, we have to be flexible architectures. But at the end of the day, we need to completely softwareize the network. That is very important. For example, Uber today is not a taxi company, it's a software company, right? Whether you take Swiggy or Zomato or anything, they are all software companies, they are not delivery companies. So in the same way, I think moving forward, to get the flexibility that we need in the network, we need to softwareize the network as much as possible. You can use the cloud technologies that are available there. You can build your own technologies because it's software flexible, and you can adapt to yourself, to your needs. That's the point I wanted.
Wonderful. No, thank you. Thank you for making that point. Shyam, as I said, last comment from you. We talking the power of the technology, maybe your perspectives on what's feasible and what's the country really going to get experienced upon.
See, I think we spoke about readiness on all the three orthogonal vectors. We spoke about consumers, we spoke about machines, we spoke about enterprise. And if you actually look back over the last 10 years, I think a lot of that has happened was actually considered extremely, extremely difficult, both from the scalability perspective in the country, complexity of technology, uptake of device perspective, and of course the whole disaggregation concept of moving the software away from hardware, moving the control away, and all of that. So I think it looks a bit a tall ask, but I think, like somebody said, I think it looks impossible till it is done. And I think I would repeat where we started. I think we are on the verge of getting there now. The recipe, the underlying recipe is in place. We have infrastructure, we have spectrum, we have towers, we have fibers, and best of all, we have the brilliant Indian mindset to go there and deliver what is expected of us to deliver. I think there are some good tailwinds. Device ecosystem is growing very fast. Capability to make programmable network is now increasing almost exponentially. The chipset industry is, I believe, and keeping my fingers crossed, is coming out of the trough that was in a year back, and I hope we see better days. So I think all of this converging into the coming quarters, I think we are very, very well suited to convert next 3, 4, 5 quarters as a foundation for the next decade or decade, as we are starting to call it now, and get there and make a really unbelievable thing real, which we can all look back and be proud of. Atul.
Wonderful, wonderful. Couldn't be a better way to summarize it. As Shyam called out, we got the ingredients, we got the recipe, and we got the tailwinds. And if there was anything, India always has a desire and the way to show the world what can be delivered. Thank you so much, the panel members, for talking us through today and really talking upon how this connected ecosystem for next decade will be the reality as we move forward from here. Let me give it back to the organizers. Thank you.
I thank all my panelists for sharing their valuable insights with us. May I please request Mr. Atul Gupta to kindly present the mementos to all the panelists. Request you to please present the memento to Mr. Shyam Madikar, Reliance Jio. Mr. Gilles Garcia, AMD. Mr. Srinivas Gudladana, Rakuten Symphony. Mr. Hardeep Saini.